Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Farm and Country Podcast. I'm Adam. Farm and Country Podcast found on the web at farmandcountrypodcast.com, and we are changing the show format just a little bit. I am finding it somewhat challenging to make 3 good shows, and I am now reducing the number of shows per week to 2, but I want to make the best quality shows and provide awesome content. So now you're going to see 1 show on Monday and 1 show on Friday. And today's show, it's Monday, and this is episode 16. And we're talking about living off the grid. So, this is a huge topic, and I thought, well, how am I going to tackle this one? So we're just going to get right into it, actually. So I got to tell you, we've got a sponsor today. The sponsor is Audible. I am a huge fan of books. I love to read, and my go-to book delivery system is audiobooks. So I have a library of almost 150 audiobooks that I've collected over years. And you can get 1 free audiobook by signing up for the Audible trial at www.audibletrials.com/FCP. Then you get a free audiobook, I get a small commission, and we're both happy. And if you don't like that, if you don't like Audible, you can just cancel your account, pay nothing, and still keep your 1 audiobook. So you can't lose, guys. audibletrials.com/FCP. Okay, so today I wanted to talk about 3 things that nobody ever thinks about when first going off the grid. So here they are. Going off the grid is one of those topics that is so vast and wide that you really can't narrow down any one thing without talking about it as a whole. So when I first started going off the grid, I had imagined myself living in an environment with absolutely no outside sources of power, just supplying everything I needed by myself, with nobody doing it, helping me, paying no bills or anything like that. So the reality is that when you actually get into being off the grid, it's far more complex than that, and it takes far longer and costs more money than you might expect right off the bat. And so I'm here to help you guys out in your quest to be off the grid. If you're looking to be an off-grid person, I'm here to help you. And I got 3 things that you need to consider when you first start planning out being off the grid. Even if it's just, I wanna start burning wood for fuel. There's 3 things you need to consider. So the number 1 thing that you consider, and this is about electricity versus, grid tied versus off-grid power, is lifetime costs. So, lifetime cost is what something costs you over a period of 20 to 30 years. So just imagine, let's apply this to cars. You go out there and you buy, a really expensive car, and it's, $50,000, but it takes no fuel. It takes no fuel. Fuel is free. For some reason, when you signed up for this car, they said, we'll give you free fuel. Okay? Now, you might be thinking, yeah, I'm going to save so much money. But the truth is, you don't really know how much money you're going to save because you don't know how much money you spend on fuel. Most people travel about 20,000 kilometers every year in a vehicle, and the cars last between 12 and, let's say, 17 years. So you've got to calculate your cost per kilometer, you calculate how much you're spending on maintenance and all that stuff, and you add it all together, and you divide by the number of years. So you might find out that buying a $5,000 car and paying for fuel is a much better deal than getting a $30,000 car and paying nothing for fuel. And so that's where I was with electric cars. When I looked at the price of electric cars and the lifetime cost, I realized that it was way more expensive than just buying a good used car and paying for fuel. And that's what I plan to do. I mean, unless electric car technology changes, and I think it probably will. When it does, maybe I'll reconsider my position. But right now, electric cars, not a good deal. So when you're talking about lifetime costs of being off the grid, you got to do the same thing. You got to look at what you're paying for electricity right now. If you're hooked up to the grid, you got to say, well, I'm paying 10 cents per kilowatt hour. A kilowatt hour is 1,000 watts running for 1 hour, and that's a pretty standard unit of measurement when we're talking about electricity. And you'll see that on your electric bill. You'll see kilowatt hours, and they'll have a rate there. And that rate is what you're paying for your electricity. But that's not the only thing you pay for. You also pay for the delivery. So you got to take the whole bill and divide it by the amount of power that you're using. So if you're looking at going off the grid and you're already grid tied, it really depends on which state you live in as to whether it's going to be very efficient for you. You gotta find out whether your state offers net metering or if it's something else. Because net metering is awesome, but if you don't get net metering, then the electric company just buys your power from you at wholesale prices. Net metering is when the electric company looks at your total power usage, and you only pay for the extra power that you're using over and above your basic cost. And sometimes they'll charge you so if you're producing 300 kilowatt hours in a month and you use 320, then you only have to pay for the 20. So that's pretty awesome. But if you're not getting net metering, then the power company says, well, we'll pay you 5 cents per kilowatt hour for the power that you made, but anything that you use will charge you 10 cents. So it ends up being not very good for you unless you're doing net metering. So I don't know which states do that. You have to kind of look into it, and there's far too many jurisdictions and companies for me to. For some reason, sorry guys, my mic just cut out on me. So let me restart that again. So we're talking about net metering and how the lifetime cost might make it worthwhile to stay on the grid and simply feed power back to the energy company. So what are the lifetime costs of being completely off the grid in electricity? Well, for starters, solar panels today last longer than ever. And solar panels are cheap. So realistically, you can put a lot of solar panels out and they're going to last you a long time. Most of them advertise that they last, around 20 years. But really, 20 years, they only start to sort of deteriorate a little bit after 20 years. They still produce power, but they start to decline a little bit. The sun's beating down on them, and nothing destroys things faster than the sun. Nothing. Except for maybe setting it on fire. That's pretty detrimental too. But your solar panels are going to last a long time, 20 to 30 years, maybe even 35 years. So, that's pretty much a lifetime for most people. Then there's things like the inverter and the cabling and everything else. Now that stuff does not last a lifetime. For me, our inverter required some maintenance after about 8 years of use. It just suddenly cut out on us, and I had to order some relatively inexpensive compared to the overall cost, but still not cheap items to fix it. And then I had to figure out what we were going to do for power while we were waiting for it to ship. So those are lifetime costs, and you have to consider them. Then also you got to consider the cost of batteries. And right now battery technology is just crap. Batteries, there's a bunch of different choices, but everybody seems to gravitate to lead acid batteries. And lead acid batteries, they're garbage. They're an old technology that just needs to die. But they're cheap. And so everybody wants to go with the cheap ones, but they don't last very long. In fact, the first set of batteries that me and my family had, they lasted maybe about 7 years. and they were high-quality batteries. And maybe a little bit of that lifespan was because we didn't really take care of them enough, but that's another problem. You gotta maintain these batteries, and if you don't maintain them very rigorously, it damages them hugely. And it's just an added bother to have to constantly equalize the batteries, constantly be flooding them and stuff like that. So it's a pain. Battery technology needs a boost. So when you're considering lifetime costs, you have to consider if you're buying lead-acid batteries, you're going to replace them probably every 10 years, and they're not cheap. They are not cheap. So a way around this is to buy battery systems that last for a long time, and the battery system I'd recommend is nickel iron. Nickel iron it's not new. It's not even kind of new. In fact, it might even almost predate lead acid batteries. And lead acid is basically a lead anode with an acid solution. And the problem with the lead is that it's soft and it falls apart. So a nickel iron battery, it has, the same setup as a lead acid battery, but instead of lead, it uses nickel and iron, which are much stronger and longer lasting. And it also uses a weaker solution to produce the power. So that comes with some drawbacks too, but in my opinion, the benefits far outweigh any of the drawbacks of these nickel iron batteries. Number one being that they last way longer and they can handle a lot of abuse without being damaged. So you can run these batteries completely flat and then charge them up again, and they'll probably be fine. Whereas lead acid batteries, you cannot run them completely flat. They will be heavily damaged. You've got to basically size your lead acid battery bank to be 50% or less, so that you're only using, 30 or 40 or maximum 50% of the total capacity of that battery bank. Otherwise, that sucker is going to last you 5 years instead of 10. So if you're going to go with nickel iron batteries, there's a couple of good manufacturers out there. There's Iron Edison. I think they're pretty decent quality. They're sold in the U.S. There's really only two manufacturers. I can't remember off the top of my head what the other one is. I'll look it up and I'll put it in the show notes. They are far more expensive to buy outright, but they last a long time. And when you're going off the grid, guys, you have to consider lifetime costs. You can't just be like, I'll use golf cart batteries. Golf cart batteries work in golf carts. They're designed for golf carts. They're not designed to be used off the grid. It's just not what their intended use was. So, they're cheap, but they also will wear out in 3 or 4 years. If that's all you can get right off the bat, well, okay, that's fine. But you've got to consider the whole cost of everything. It might be in your advantage to take out a loan to buy the best kind of batteries and pay that off over a long period of time, rather than paying a tiny bit of money for batteries that are not going to last very long. So number 2, talking about being off the grid, it's not all about electricity. I know I've talked a lot about electricity and batteries and stuff like that, but being off the grid is far more comprehensive than just where you get your electric power. If you really wanted to, you don't need a whole lot of electricity to live a really basic life. I like electricity. I need it. Right now, this show is being recorded with renewable energy. If that means anything to you, then you can, look up to me as your mentor. No, I'm just kidding. But there are other aspects, and they're easier to get into than electricity. So I'm talking about your heating costs and your cooling costs. Now, here in Canada, it's all heating for me. We don't have air conditioning in our house. And I know some of you are probably like, what? No air conditioning? How do you survive? Well, it just doesn't get hot enough here that air conditioning is a big problem. We've got ceiling fans, we've got desk fans, and that's about it. It's supposed to get to be 27 degrees tomorrow, and that's the hottest it's been all year long. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but it's not very hot. 30 degrees would be hot, but even then, you don't really need a lot of air conditioning. So here in the winter, of course, you need heat, and you need lots of it. And everybody burns propane. But propane is really expensive. And you got to have somebody come and fill it up all the time. And did I mention, it's really expensive. It's far more expensive than natural gas. So what we did is we put in a wood stove. And it's cheap to run. I burn garbage wood in it. Not treated wood, now, mind you, because I'm not trying to pollute the world here. It's just regular wood, but it's scrap. Wherever I can find it, I use scrap wood. Pallets, construction lumber. It just takes me some time to go and find it, but it is free. So that was what we do. It's not a perfect solution for heat because our house, it's not sitting on a basement, so the pipes freeze all the time. But we're going to be fixing that this year. We're going to be putting a basement underneath, and that will hopefully solve our pipe freezing problem. So the third thing that you need to consider is that you don't have to go off the grid all at once. Everybody starts thinking, oh yeah, I need to do this and this and this, and it's going to be so expensive. You don't need to jump into this and just go all in. It's not all in or nothing. So here's an example. The very first thing that we did is we bought the wood stove and we installed it, and that probably saved us between $5,000 and $10,000 every year in fuel. And we also bought the inverter, and we bought some cables and batteries, and that was it. That was all we had for probably 5 years. And then I bought solar panels and added them to the system. And obviously, that keeps raising our capacity to be off the grid. And this is the first year that we've been really independent in terms of our electricity. And I plan on adding to it. I'm going to add more solar panels, and I'm going to add more wind turbines, and I'm just going to keep adding to the system to make it the way I want it. And we're going to replace the wood stove, and we're going to do this and that and everything else. And really what we're looking at is the system evolves over time. You start with the basics, start with the cheapest thing that's going to have the most impact. My opinion, that's heating. So start by replacing your heating system with something that burns wood, or something that uses ground source heat. Although that's not a cheap installation, it is more efficient. You could also try heating with the sun by putting solar heating panels on the side of your house. It doesn't look great. It kind of makes the house look funny, but it does work. If it's sunny outside, those solar heating panels can really push a lot of heat into your house. So there's lots of ways to get involved in this that you can start right away, and you just progress over time. So that's it, guys. That's it for this episode. I'm trying my best to provide the best quality content I can. It's really busy right now this year. And I find that my focus is being stolen by a bunch of different things. And that's not good. When you're trying to build something, you always need to narrow your focus. And right now, my family is tiptoeing around me as I'm recording because the kids are off school today, so I didn't have that nice break where there was nobody here to record. But you know what? You do the best you can, right? You don't give up on your dreams just because it's hard. And this applies to your homesteading dreams, guys. If you want to live off the grid, if you want to be on your own land, you've got to start somewhere. You've got to take a first step. Maybe it's just you start looking for land. Maybe it's just you start by planting a garden where you are right now. Take a first step. It might take years to accomplish this, but if a dream is worth pursuing, then it's worth pursuing for years until you get it done. And that's exactly how we've done it. We've made tons of mistakes along the way, and every time I make a mistake, I look back and I say, oh, I wish somebody had been there to, help me and coach me and give me advice about should I do this, should I do that. I'm actually considering opening up a coaching program for homesteading. So that's something to consider. If you think that you would do well with a coach, send me a message. Send me a message and maybe we can set something up. I'm just throwing these ideas out there right now. But a lot of people do this kind of coaching and benefit from it. So that's it, guys. Thanks for listening. Find us again on the web, farmandcountrypodcast.com. Don't forget about our online store, farmandcountry.store. We'll see you on Friday. Have a good night.